So I guess we'll start with the day's events and then go into some deeper issues as well. Today is basically the second or third day, depending on how you count it, of the ground operation in Gaza. What Israel is doing is moving in very slowly and very carefully and using its overwhelming firepower to try to limit as much as possible casualties, which so far seems to be working. And it won't always work, but it so far seems to be working. It's clearly moved into the northern part of Gaza, and there are hints that's moved somewhere else. The government is trying to do its best to keep what they call Arafela Krav, which is the fog of war. So not only we don't know, but obviously Hamas doesn't know. They've interrupted their communications, and the less they know, the better. But we do know what they're saying. Today, 2 soldiers were wounded, one seriously, one not so seriously, one from a mortar fire and one from an encounter with some Hamas terrorists. But relatively speaking, for 2 days of operations inside of Gaza, it's a reasonable start. In the north, there continues to be the same drip drop of Hezbollah firing on the north, not wanting to get involved in a full-scale war yet, but sort of bothering us, so to speak. The first couple of days, we had some substantial casualties. That's much less so now. The troops in the north have learned how to deal with the attacks more effectively. In other words, shooting and killing the people coming with the anti-tank missiles before they can shoot, and also being in the proper places in terms of protection so that they themselves are not targets. So luckily in the last few days, we have not had casualties in the north. Rocket fire continues. Yesterday was a fair number of heavy bombardments. Today we've had one major bombardment towards the center of the country. 2 of the rockets got through. It's not clear whether they were actually the rockets or what was left of rockets. One of them got into the schoolyard of a school that was actually in session. The second one took place in an empty area. So that continues despite the fact that we have troops inside of Gaza. But as we've learned from previous encounters, until we basically get all of Gaza, they'll be able to keep on shooting rockets. They have many left, and they can continue to fire the rockets. The real fear in terms of rockets is really not from Hezbollah. Quite frankly, yes, a few of them get through, but they're mostly a bother more than a real threat, at least this far away in Tel Aviv. Much closer, of course, it's much more serious in Ashkelon, and of course in places like Sderot, which have now been evacuated. There isn't enough warning in Tel Aviv. We have a minute and a half between the time that the air raid sirens go off until the rocket will potentially hit. The real fear is what would happen if the Hezbollah gets involved in the north. They have many times the number of rockets that Hamas has, and they have rockets that are both more powerful, and they have rockets that are also intelligent. In other words, they can go seek a particular target. How effective that'll be, I do not know. The reality is one of the ways they look for a target is through GPS. GPS in Israel barely works these days. Don't try to go somewhere with Waze. You'll end up, I was on a Waze with Waze some ways where I didn't quite know the best way of going because of traffic. Let's put it this way. It told me to keep on making a right turn again and again until I turned it off. So Waze is totally inaccurate at this point because the GPS is so is designed at this point not to work, at least during certain periods of time. Today was also a number of encounters where just a few minutes, this is about an hour ago, a group of terrorists came out of a tunnel close to the border. They were hoping to surprise the Israeli troops at the border. In return, they were surprised and the terrorist group was wiped out. Again, the advantage of having troops inside of Gaza and we were surprised, to say the understatement of the century 3 weeks ago. The soldiers in Gaza right now are not going to be surprised, but tragedies will take place. There's no question about it. The big story on one level is, of course, the ground operation. What does it mean? The second question, of course, continues to be the question of the hostages. And, I've spoken to hostage families. I was actually the first day the first protest took place. The first uh, it was a father and husband, a bunch of hostages. The first day he arrived at the Kiryat, at the army headquarters to begin the protest, I actually met him about a few minutes after he first showed up, and spoke and talked to him. And I've spoken to a few others. What can you say to these people? There's nothing you can say. There's nothing. There's no confidence you can give them. All you can do is share in their concern. Um, their first and only concern is the return of their loved ones, and one has to understand that. Uh, I believe the Israeli government will be willing to do crazy things in order to get the hostages returned. The one thing it's not willing to do is guarantee the continued rule of Hamas. And that's why there really hasn't been a hostage deal until now. Because to the Hamas, they believed that by taking the hostages, they were guaranteeing the fact that Israel would not go all the way to remove them from power. Uh, they thought the country was completely divided. We didn't have the will to do it. After all, the last group of times we didn't have the will. We weren't willing to have the number of casualties it's going to take to do a ground operation in Gaza. Now it almost seems irrelevant. I mean, it's not irrelevant, unfortunately, to any soldier and soldiers' families that may be wounded or die. But once you lose 1,400 people, whatever the cost is going to be, that's the cost you're willing to pay, unfortunately. And they did not understand that. But they still believe, I think, until this moment, that by having the hostages, they can somehow manage to maintain their rule. And from all I can understand, they're not willing to accept a deal for all of our prisoners in return for all of the hostages, unless we also guarantee not to attack them afterwards. And that's just something we're not willing to do. We're not willing, under any circumstances at this point, to allow Hamas to remain in power, regardless of what the cost is, because there's no way that we can stay a state, frankly. If people believe in our own state, if we cannot once and for all eliminate people who've done what they've done to us. And they're a state entity. And any other country in the world, if a state entity had done what Hamas had done to us, they would bomb them out of oblivion. It's a bit troubling. In the last few hours, I understand that the U.S. is sort of criticizing Israel for the number of casualties in Gaza. I understand it. I understand it for political reasons why they must do that. But there is no war, especially a war where which is fought in an urban environment that uses civilians in order to protect the soldiers, so to speak, their soldiers, that is possible to take place without civilian casualties. It's terrible. I wish it wasn't the case. But again, no one talked during World War II, fighting the Nazis, about, are you worried about the number of civilians that when you bomb the factories in Frankfurt are going to be killed nearby? Maybe Dresden afterwards, there was a lot of questions, but no one talked about the firebombs in Tokyo and other places, not to mention, of course, the H-bomb, or the A-bomb, excuse me. It's terrible. It's terrible that civilians die. But whose responsibility was that to begin with? I don't know if Israel could do more to limit the amount of civilians that get killed. I don't think it can do that and eliminate Hamas at the same time. I mean, certainly, I'm sure some decisions at the edges, but by and large, if the Hamas insists on using civilians as human shields, there's very little we can do, because the ultimate goal of removing Hamas is the ultimate goal. And again, with the hostages, again, I have to get back to it because I've met these families again and again and again, and they demonstrate very close to my home, so I go out there every time. It's an impossible situation. It's an impossible situation. I spoke to one of them yesterday, and they said, we understand that probably only 10 to 30% of our people are going to survive. They sort of understood that. They're hoping not. They're hoping for a deal. But the reality is, the only way, in my opinion, at this point, this is going to happen is if the army manages to somehow save some percentage of them. I hope that's not the case, but unfortunately, that's what I fear is the case at this point. Someone asked me in advance to talk about this issue of ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, or whatever we're talking about. Look, it's outrageous in my view that the United Nations called for a humanitarian ceasefire. What exactly does that mean, a ceasefire? A ceasefire so that we no longer work to get our hostages out, or a ceasefire so that we no longer remove Hamas from power? That's the reality. A ceasefire means keep Hamas in power. And, the UN resolution, being the UN, didn't even mention, let's say, a ceasefire in return for the Red Cross visiting all of the hostages. Anything like that. I would be totally in favor of 24-hour ceasefire in return for the Red Cross getting to visit all of the hostages. I think the Israeli government would favor something like that. But no one is going to give a ceasefire without anything, and without anything relating to the hostages. Release 20 hostages, I'll give you a ceasefire for 1 day. Release 40 hostages, you get 2 days. Some version therein. But you expect us to have a ceasefire and give us nothing? I'm sorry that it's hurting. But this is war. You declared war on us. I mean, you've always declared war. That's one of the things that people don't realize. Hamas has been at war with us since they seized power in Gaza. When you talk to people and they claim, the blockade of Gaza and all those things, remind them of one simple fact. If Hamas had accepted the quartet being the United Nations, the United States, the EU, and Russia, if they would have accepted their terms, which basically meant accepting the agreements that the Palestinian Authority had reached with Israel, and stating there'll be no more war, then there would never have been a blockade of Gaza. Then this would never have happened. It was a blockade of Gaza because they refused to accept that, and they said that our goal is to eliminate Israel, and always has been their goal. So, why would you not blockade people who say that my goal is to eliminate you, and do that by firing rockets from the very beginning? Remember, they fired rockets before we left Gaza. They were firing on Sderot. I was one of those people who supported the withdrawal from Gaza. I still think it was a good idea because of the amount of casualties we were having along what was called Sea of Philadelphia, the road of Philadelphia, and maintaining those settlements would be impossible. They would have been overrun, obviously, in a minute this time. But leave that part aside. I thought, wrongly, that, okay, once we move out of Gaza, if they fire one missile at us, we can level the place. Of course, I was being naive. If it doesn't make a difference if a sovereign country, sovereign area fires at you. If that area happens to be Palestinian, the world thinks, wait, you're using overwhelming force. You can't use overwhelming force against them. That was the reality, and that's the reality we are with today. And unfortunately, there's no easy way. I talked about a little bit in some of the writings recently. We look at all the anti-Israel sentiment in the world right now. Now, it comes from two different places. One of it is, of course, this very large Arab diaspora that's been created over the last 20 years, or even further. If you go back to the diaspora in France, it goes back to the Moroccan Algerian diaspora that was created. But now the Syrian diaspora and also the Palestinian diaspora that exists all over the world. Today, there are about as many Arab Americans as there are Jewish Americans. And they've learned to organize, and their natural sympathies are with the Palestinians. So, of course, all the Muslims in other parts of the world, there's a natural affinity. We can discuss why that should be or not, but that's the fact. So they provide a core group of people who automatically support the Palestinian cause wherever they are in the world. And then we have the far left that has developed this ideology that I really didn't understand until I wrote the piece about 4 or 5 days ago, and I did the research on it, and I really didn't understand what was going on with the far left. I mean, there's always been the issue of the left being anti-Israel because Israel was an occupier, but of some form or another, or the whole view that I thought, well, they always support the weaker group, but it's more than that. This revolutionary view that everybody's colonial and you have to oppose colonialists by all means, and all means are acceptable. And that's the part that's really hard to take, is the fact that all means are acceptable. And that's why they can have a really hard time condemning any sort of actions of Hamas. And it's just hard to really believe, really. It's really shocking that's where some parts or a large part of the left is at this point. Mostly it's the non-Jewish left, but we've also seen Jewish leftists who've bought into this. Listen, Israel is far from perfect. I was in a debate with somebody actually on the Substack, and he wanted to know whether I believed everything my government says, and I believe in my government. I said to him, until the day of this war began, I had spent the last 8 months protesting against this government. Every single Saturday night, and usually one day a week in the middle of the week, I was protesting this government. I despise this government, quite honestly. And so do at least 50, probably at this point, it's about 80% of the country, but 50% of the country has consistently despised this government from the time it got started. That does not mean we despise the country. And that does not mean we're willing to accept what was done. You listen to even the people who would be considered on the far left, but the far left Zionist left. And I have not seen anybody who says that our goal should not be the dismantling of Hamas, period. Both governmentally and militarily, they need to go. There's no question about that. Keep in mind the fact that Hamas has been one of the major obstacles to peace from the very beginning. This goes all the way back to the time after the assassination of Rabin. They were the ones who sponsored all of the first suicide bombings that took place at that period of time that brought Netanyahu to power. The reason he beat Shimon Peres back then was because of all the suicide bombings that took place, and those were all done by Hamas. So that's really where, that's who Hamas is. So the other thing I want to talk about is two more things, and then I'll open up for questions. One, there are a few of you here that are in Israel, obviously, but most of you are in the States. It's really hard to summarize the feelings here in Israel. It's a very different time. I first made Aliyah in the time after the Yom Kippur War. And when I first made Aliyah, it was a country that was partially broken. I joined an army that was partially broken, but was committed towards making changes, and quickly it made all those changes that changed the state of the IDF drastically in the period after the Yom Kippur War. There was the deaths, which were very large during Yom Kippur War. The country was much smaller. We had less than half the population we do today. Today, it's a little bit different. It's almost stronger, the feeling of uncertainty that exists. People are absolutely committed that we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this and be stronger. We're going to rebuild the civil society in ways that it hasn't been built before. There is that commitment. There is that strength. But there's a certain sadness also. There's nobody I know who's not partly sad. The country has various levels of PTSD. The worst cases are obviously the people who live through it around the Gaza Strip and on those kibbutzim and those places. They're the worst. But there's almost nobody who doesn't have some form of it. Unfortunately, you watch TV these days. My son sometimes makes me turn it off because it's full of stories. It's stories of those who died, those who were saved, it's full of all these stories. I've heard, you hear so many stories, and then so many funerals and everything else, and it's all encompassing. And the country will get through it. It's gotten through so many things in the past, and it'll get through this as well. I'm reasonably confident we'll somehow come out stronger, but different. And which brings me to try to answer someone's question, and then I want to just get into anti-Semitism for a second. Someone asked me in advance, what I think the future is, and I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't think anybody does. I said to Abi and Eitan a couple of days ago when we were together, I said, I don't think I've ever lived in a period with so much uncertainty, with so many different factors that are unclear and unknown, and so many things that are beyond our control, whether it's physical safety, whether it's economic safety, whether it's the state of society. So it's a period of incredible uncertainty. And of course, that's a difficult thing. I said to a friend recently, I wouldn't want to check my blood pressure anytime during this period of time. That's the reality. But then there's the other reality, of course. I do want to touch on I touched a little bit about the anti-Semitism from the far left, but it's made the news here, to say the least. You are living at the ones in the States. I've been surprised, and I've written about anti-Semitism over the years, but the extent that it's appeared recently is beyond anything that one could have imagined. It's like something that was bubbling below the surface, and suddenly this has given everyone a chance to let it bubble up. And it's on the far right, it's on the far left. Luckily, the center, I think, is still holding in the United States, still holding in most of Europe, in Germany and places like Czechoslovakia, with countries that have been true friends to us in ways that we couldn't believe. But to say the least, it's a very concerning period of time to be a Jew anywhere in the world. My wife keeps on saying I should end positively. She says sometimes I end too negatively. And the positive thing I could say is that as much as I say people are troubled and concerned, they've also never seen a period of time when everybody's tried to help everybody in every which way. It doesn't make a difference whether I'm walking home from the supermarket and suddenly someone makes me feel like an old man because I'm carrying 3 bags and they want to help me, or anything else. It's everywhere. So everyone is trying to help everybody in any which way they can, and everyone's trying to find some way to get involved and to do something. One of my old friends called before. Unfortunately, the phone call got disconnected. I'm jealous of him. He's my age. He was my college roommate, and somehow he managed to get himself in a uniform again. He asked me, "What am I jealous of? The fact that he's in a uniform, or that he's still fit into a uniform?" So I said a little bit of both. So the reality is, everyone is trying to do what they can and wants to do what they can, and believes that together we can somehow overcome this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be something that we're all going to have to do together, and I think we will succeed in doing it together. Okay, I'm going to try to figure out how to unmute everybody. It says mute everybody. Let's see if I can unmute everybody, or ask all to unmute. Okay, so I'm asking all to unmute. You can unmute yourselves at this point if you want to ask a question, just one at a time. Let's see if it works. Anybody trying? Wait, whoever that is, it's not. Your microphone. Okay, something you whatever. Yes, that microphone. Whoever's talking right now, something wrong with your microphone. You sound like Mickey Mouse, I'm afraid. Nancy, to talk at once. So many people will talk at once. Well, okay, okay, let's try this again. Okay, is this Harvey trying to speak? Okay, try a different microphone or something, because you're not coming through at all. If someone wants to speak, just raise your hand or something, or
the way he usually does.
Howard.
Answer Michael.
Good. Howard. Hi.
Hi. I guess I have a different kind of question that touches a little bit on the day after, when this is over. What do you see as the political future inside Israel?
Okay, so
is Netanyahu? I mean, is Netanyahu finished?
Okay, everybody believes Netanyahu is finished, but Netanyahu. There was a little storm last night, frankly. Netanyahu, after last night, after his first press conference that he gave together with Gantz and Gallant, he wouldn't take responsibility again. He's the only person who has not taken full responsibility, sort of evaded the question. And then late last night, he put out a tweet basically attacking the head of the intelligence service and the head of the Shabak, intelligence service of the army, and that's who was responsible. That created an immediate uproar Both Gantz and Eisenkot and a few others demanded that he retract it, and he actually retracted and apologized for it. But by all accounts, he's a dead man walking in terms of politics. But on the other hand, we've said that before. He somehow thinks he can get out of this by blaming everybody else. I don't think it's possible. Polls now show he has support of about 18% of the people. And people in Likud, while not saying it publicly or privately, said they would vote him out, even if it came to that. So I think he's a dead man walking. Now you ask a different question, though, because I think the future politics are very unclear. Because I think if I had a best guess, I would say there's going to be a huge shift to the extreme center. What do I mean by that? The leftist view that we can make peace, it's really hard to sort of believe that right now. In other words, there was always a question whether the Palestinians were ever going to accept us, and I've always had that question: will they ever accept us? But with the hatred that was shown to do what they did, people are going to say, "Wait a second, we can't trust them. We have to be really concerned. We can't give them back any land or whatever version there is." It's going to be very tough to push a leftist view, a far leftist view. On the other hand, the far rightist view, it's quite clear that we need to remove all these settlements in the middle of nowheres. There's no way we can afford to defend these settlements. Look, I know, some of these settlements that are in the middle of nowheres, they basically have 6 soldiers, none of them combat, who are sent there for a week to defend these places. There's no way these people could possibly defend if there was an attack Hamas style against these settlements. So there is no way that we can maintain, I don't know, 100 of these illegal settlements all over the place and protect them. We had 20 times as many troops in the West Bank as we had on the Gaza border. So I think the view is going to come that is a strong view to the center, which is going to say we have to be, a security view. We have to make some sort of arrangements with the Palestinians, but we can't move too quickly. We can't give them too much. On the other hand, we can't have all these settlements everywhere. Just from a security standpoint, they just can't be maintained. We can't afford to maintain the amount of troops that are required to protect them going forth in the future. That's my view. I don't know whether that's really where people are going to be, but I have a feeling most people are going to come fairly close to that view. So it means a real centrist government. We also need a competent government. Let's be honest, more than anything else, besides everything else about this war, and leave aside the period leading up to it and the failures of the army, what we've seen in the 3 weeks since the war is the total incompetence of our government in everything they're trying to do. I mean, their relations with the hostage families have been absolutely terrible. They've been unable to develop an economic plan. They're still talking about it. We're 3 weeks into the war, and they're still talking about an economic plan they haven't come up with. I could go through a whole list of things. A group of most incompetent people are running this government, and people have no right to be ministers, are ministers of this government. I don't mean right in terms of political right. I mean in terms of experience. These people have no experience, and they were made to be ministers because of Netanyahu's political needs. That's also is going to change, I believe. But who knows? I've been wrong in terms of that before. Anyone else? Yes.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My question is this. I understand that the goal of eliminating Hamas, I understand that goal. My question is that really achievable? Because Hamas is also an ideology, and can you defeat an ideology militarily? Might it just turn into a hydra? Might it just be able to reconstitute itself? Might we just be sowing the seeds for another generation of hate? So I'm not sure. I'd like to believe this is an achievable goal, but I question whether it is. And so I'd like your thoughts.
Okay, so you can't defeat an idea. Everyone knows that, and Israel knows that as well. But you can defeat a military. You can remove its ability to build rockets. You can eliminate its control of the government. You can hopefully replace one idea with a different idea. Look, Hamas is successful as an idea when it's successful. In other words, when people think it's successfully providing a revolution for the Palestinian people, it's the opposition that works, then people support it. If it ends up to be a disaster for Hamas itself, because they're all killed, and Gaza is devastated until new aid comes and we rebuild it in some form or another, then people will say, wait a second. I mean, I'm hoping, again, no guarantees, that the view will be, wait a second, maybe this is not the way to go. Maybe there are better ways to go. Now we have to provide a better way. Look, looking back over the last 50 years, I've always said, and I continue to say, our greatest mistake is we didn't make the lives of the Palestinians heavenly. We should have made the lives of the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in prior times in Gaza, the best possible thing. We should have made it great. We should have worked to see that less of them hate us because they're living such good lives. Look, the Arab Israelis, I don't think most of them love us, but most of them are very happy with their lives in Israel. They go to the Technion, they become doctors, they become lawyers, they become vice presidents of Apple. They find personal success, and they find it because of what we provide them, what the state of Israel provides its citizens. If we had made sure that the people living in the West Bank and Gaza had the same sort of opportunities, maybe they would have hated us less. I don't know. And maybe that's what we have to do, but it'll take at least a generation. You're right. There's a possibility with sowing more hatred for another generation, no question about it. I am quite sure that the son or daughter of anyone who would kill the brother or sister is going to hate us for a long time. And it's going to require a generation of effort to try to decrease it. Will we ever succeed? I don't know. I don't know that they will ever accept us as anything but crusaders here in this land that they hope that they can push out at some point. I don't have that answer, especially in a world that's become much more nationalistic, which is a whole other story. The world has also changed in ways that I would not have expected. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have said we're heading towards a direction of what I call the Star Trek future of people getting along. Instead, we're going to we're going to the Star Wars future of people not getting along and nation states fighting with one another. I mean, who would have thought there would have been a Ukraine-Russian war? So I don't know. I don't know. It's not a question of finance. It's not a question. It's the whole envelope of things that might work. I don't know that it would work. To get me wrong. In other words, I don't know that anything would work. But you got to try. You got to try different things. There are no good answers. All you can do is do your best and not make the same mistakes you made before. I see Nancy Kaplan here has raised her hand. So go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. So I can't stop thinking about the captives. I dream about it every night. I wake up in the middle of the night. It's just totally, taking over my head. What if we did whatever it took to get all of them back and release whatever the prisoners are they want? Because just like he did with Shalit, which was stupid and horrible, but this is even more pressing to me. And we agreed a language that, sounds like we're going to be okay with them or whatever. And then we get our people back and then we turn around and we say, you know what, we lied. And then we go take them out. I mean,
I don't know. Again, I would think that the Hamas is smart enough to not accept it in that way and would depend on some third-party guarantees. I don't have the answer to that question. But I don't. So the problem is, I don't think Hamas wants to give up these captives. I think they see them as their ace in the hole. I think that they think that they're, as long as they have the captives, they're not going to be destroyed in the end. We won't go to wherever, hole they're all holding them in because we're afraid we'll kill some of them. I wish I was confident that there was a way to convince them to give up the captives. I think every time right now, from what I understand, there's been an attempt, they've hit a dead end in some form or another in negotiations. It's also not clear who's holding them. It's not clear who's making decisions. I do think we're willing to go as far as we can, but I don't think, again, the issue of stopping the war is the major issue, and it's a terrible dilemma. And for these 220 people or 230 people, it's the worst dilemma possible, and for their families and everything else. But we also now have, my guess is 40,000 soldiers in harm's way in Gaza already. I don't know. I'm just making that number up almost, but I'm going to make a guess somewhere in that number. If we don't pursue this, if we don't go forward, you go backwards, and you can suffer casualties, and you can easily suffer 200 casualties in a very short period of time. So it's terrible. Everything about this is terrible, to be quite honest with you, and there's no simple solutions to solving this part of it. Wish I had something more optimistic to say about that, and I don't. I mean, it's like I said, every time I speak to these families, I feel terrible, but I don't know what else one can feel at this point. Anybody else? Yes, Amy. I do not hear you. You're muted. Yeah, I ask you to unmute. You're still muted.
Unmuted now, right?
Yes, now you can speak. Now, go ahead.
Okay. So my question is, because I'm in New York and I only know what I read, which obviously everything I read has a slant to it. What percentage would you say of the Israeli population, or the people living in Israel, want to literally just like bomb Gaza and be done, as opposed to I don't want to say want to find peace. Obviously, everyone wants to find peace, but without more innocent people being killed. And I don't know the answer to that, even for my own self, but I believe I'm like the person that just spoke. The hostage situation really upsets me and consumes me. Just wondering what you think.
That's a very hard question. It depends on what part of the day you ask people, to some extent. Was it after they ran from the shelter and a bomb from a rocket? At what point, if we had space lasers, whatever American Congresswoman said, we have space lasers or something, we would love to use space lasers to get them all, kill all Hamas with a space laser. I don't know. Look, I would honestly say if I had a magic wand and the Palestinians could all move to somewhere else and be happy somewhere else, that would be great, right? I mean, well, on every level, but they can't be, and we can't kill them for all the moral reasons that exist why people should kill other people. We can't do any of that, and therefore we have this intractable problem. But again, look, there is no question that we're being a little less careful than we've been previously in the bombing. But on the other hand, look, if my son was a tankist or a Golani person right now in the front lines inside of Gaza, am I going to say, okay, when you're right now the method that we're using is massive bombings right in advance of the area that the soldiers are going to advance in. In other words, if you hear over every night there's massive bombings, what that is basically is saying for the next, I don't know, whatever the next night's advance, whether it's 500 meters or whatever it might be, I have no idea what it is, but that area is going to be massively bombed overnight. Now, the hope is that all the civilians have left that area. At this point, the hope is that the Israeli army is close enough, they finally believe they're going to come in. But, maybe some civilians left. If you're the parent of a soldier who's going to be in that tank, that's going to have to move into that area tomorrow morning, what are you most concerned with? Are you concerned about the civilian that didn't listen to the request to move south, or the fact that we might kill them while trying to clear the area from any Hamas fighters before my son or daughter moves forward with the troops tomorrow morning, or maybe at night usually? I mean, for me, it's a pretty easy trade-off at this point. And unfortunately, in war, it's usually an easy trade-off. It's a terrible trade-off, but it's an easy trade-off. It's not like they didn't get warning. So, in terms of the overall question you asked, I don't have an answer to that. I don't think anyone does. And I think it depends on what part of the day you ask that question, and go back to what I said at the beginning about the fact that that everybody in this country has some form of PTSD. And so it depends, you react differently with PTSD. So I can't truly give that answer. It varies. Yes, Claude.
Quick question. Rafa, can you tell us who is blocking the ability of non-Palestinians, Americans, Palestinians with dual citizenship from getting out of Gaza in the south, and also letting in goods?
Okay, so in terms of letting them out, that is Hamas. It's stopping them from leaving. That's very clear. That's what's happening. So that's why they're not being able to leave. In terms of goods, Israel has been limiting. It is increasing. Until now, it's been 20 trucks a day. Today, there'll be 56 trucks, from what I understand. And the goal is to get to 100 trucks within the next 2 or 3 days. Part of the problem is technically inspecting those trucks. And part of the issue is Israel was, concerned about who would, what would be going in those trucks. So at the moment, there'll be more and more humanitarian aid going into the southern part of Gaza. But in terms of getting out, it's all Hamas. It's stopping the Americans, the everybody. I mean, there's also the dual citizens in Gaza, and none of them can get out. Elizabeth, I think.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Maybe my question has been answered already, but I don't follow the news 24 hours on 24 hours. I only watch a few hours a day. But all these people in Gaza are pushed to the south, right?
Correct.
But why there is no neighbor country who is willing them to accept them, or did I miss something?
No, Egypt has, listen, what people don't realize for all these years is the talk about the Gaza blockade. Well, Israel only covers only part of Gaza. There's a border with Egypt, and that border has been open or closed depending on what the Egyptians want. But keep in mind the fact that Hamas is allied with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which is the major enemy of the government. And the government has been fighting Muslim Brotherhood terrorists in Sinai on and off for the last 5 years. So the Egyptians have this love-hate relationship, very little love, but a fair amount of hate, but a little bit of friendship to Gaza. They could take all the people, that was part of the talk, but they basically warned Israel, don't you dare push them into Egypt, because Egypt doesn't want the 2 million people in Gaza. I mean, that would obviously be a solution. I mean, no one's suggesting we move them, but they could go to Egypt. But that's the option that exists. They could move to other places, but again, we're not trying to get them to move. We just want to get them to move out of the way. There's a difference. We don't want them to die. Honestly, we don't want them to get hurt in the war. We want them to get out of the way and move to the south of Gaza. The hope would be that once Hamas is defeated, the world will be some other government, some sort of international force of some kind that would take over Gaza for a period of time, and Gaza will be rebuilt. Is that going to happen? We don't know. But that's really where it stands. They could go somewhere else. And this could go somewhere else temporarily, but I'm sure the Egyptians are afraid if they came temporarily, they might stay. So.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Anyone else? Ehud, go ahead.
Just to mention that the Egyptians have closed the border with Gaza 10 years ago. It's not open. It's closed for more than 10 years, and they won't open it.
And that's part of it's always Israel's blockading Gaza. Oh, we forgot about Egypt. But yes, Egypt has been blockading Gaza for the same period of time. Look, remember back when Israel was in the negotiations with Sadat for giving back the Sinai. We offered him Gaza. He didn't want it. That's the reality. It's a problematic place, to be quite honest with you, for all sorts of reasons. Most of the people there originate as refugees from the 1947-48 war. But they were never resettled. That's a whole other story, obviously. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, it's Janet.
Hi.
From my reading, I've learned that the people who started Hamas, many of them are now living in Qatar.
Zoom?
And It had this vision of, that silly show here in the United States, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and New York and this, and they're living that way in Qatar. Is that so? And how can that be used to help people understand
Or local?
that there are many levels of
Guy
this?
who was Swiss, I got on somehow.
Well, look, Gaza, the political leadership of Hamas has lived outside of Gaza for many years. Currently, mostly in Qatar. They go back and forth between Qatar and Turkey. And they're not the founders of Hamas, but they are the political leadership, so to speak. And that, of course, begins
I
the
think I've
question
just
of
reflected, and these are just questions and answers.
somebody who's that, of course, brings the question, Qatar being an independent broker when it comes to negotiations over the hostages, and which is very problematic because they've really been the representative of Hamas more than anything else, and they've ensured the fact that Hamas has remained in power. They're the ones that are providing Hamas with our government's approval, particularly Netanyahu governments over the years, with money. So yes, they've been living. They live in Qatar or in Turkey outside, and they make political decisions for Hamas, and they don't live in Gaza. But the people, even the ones who live in Gaza, live until we bomb their houses, live pretty nice lives. They make a lot of money off of all the money that comes in. They do very well, as often happens. But again, look, it doesn't solve the problem, so to speak. Inherently, whoever the leadership of Hamas is, Hamas is what it is, and it's a terror organization. Ultimately, it's a terror organization that's running a country, small country, one with limited independence, but it's a terror organization running a country. It's the only terror organization at the moment. We had a short period of time when ISIS had some land area that it controlled, and it was a terrorist state, and the whole world went to war with ISIS. Now there's a little bit of ISIS left in a little pocket of Syria, from what I can gather. It's up to us now, unfortunately, to remove Hamas. And, again, all of this is good. And I just want to bring back again, I don't want to end on a negative note, but bring back the concern still is, will Hezbollah get involved? Will they feel they have to? What are the Iranians' game here? That's a big question as well. The Iranians have been attacking American forces through their proxies, and America hit back and directly hit the Iranian National Guard bases 2 nights ago. So I think the Iranians have been deterred, but who knows? We thought Hamas had been deterred. We think Hezbollah doesn't want to attack, but again, are we looking at it from the wrong perspective? And of course, if we get into a full-scale war with Hezbollah, it's not going to be pretty, to be honest with you. And we're just hoping it won't happen. I'm hoping that anything that happens with Hezbollah will wait a couple of years until our laser systems are fully deployed. They're in the experimental stage at the moment. There's rumors that one has been deployed already. I don't know if it's true or not, but they do work, it seems. But it'll be a couple of years until they're fully operational. Then things might change, and the balance of terror, so to speak, by missiles will change dramatically, in my opinion. And so maybe that's a positive note. We can hope for the lasers and Star Wars in the air, which this is sometimes seemed like. Okay, any last questions? Okay, well, I thank you all for coming. I'm going to paste it. There may be 1 or 2 people who don't get the Substack who joined, so I pasted it in. I hope I pasted it everywhere. I will try to paste it everywhere. I will try, depending on what goes on, to do this every 2 weeks or so. Maybe hopefully there'll be no news and I won't do it, and it'll be very quiet 2 weeks. I fear that won't be the case. So thank you all for participating, and good luck to all of us. And as the Star Wars thing ends, may the Force be with all of us. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
How big is this group?
Uh,
Did you see how many people were listening?
this is